Welcome to Saturday's Warrior. I'm Trevor, and joining me from the College Huddle is Michael of the Fanatics Show. Michael, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on tonight. Looking forward to talking some ball.
Yeah, man. Well, unfortunately, we're talking a little bit less ball and more realignment. The gift that keeps on giving, or I suppose that's how you want to look at it. It just it doesn't end, and just as we felt like it was kind of going away, that things have kind of settled for the meantime with the ACC. Um, more rumors start coming out about UNC and other things, and it keeps coming back up. And so tonight, what we want to look at are the kind of the top candidates for the SEC if they do, if and when they do end up expanding again, and grading them based on a few of the kind of high level criteria that I think generally people are looking at in terms of that drive realignment. So, Michael, can you tell me first, though, before we get into grading, a little bit about where the SEC's mind is on this? Like, do you think the SEC really wants to expand more? And if so, just how big do you think they're willing to go?
So the SEC at this point does not want to expand. They're content with the 16 teams that they have after adding Texas and Oklahoma. Um, really, that's what they're content with right now. And I feel like, and this is my personal opinion, that the only way the SEC will expand is if they get the right team in there. Now, what is that right team? Is it a team that can, compete for a championship year in and year out? Is it a team that, might not compete, but is going to be in that upper level? Or is it, any number of things? Um, and we could look at it on multitude of different ways as far as what we think the SEC will look for. But I know I watched your video not too long ago with Big Ten Huddle, and I know that the Big Ten, they're more looking towards the academics as well. I know the AAU plays a big factor in who they're looking for, and that's just not something that the SEC plays a huge factor in. The academic side. I mean, obviously, each SEC school, they do pride themselves in academics, but not to the standard that probably the Big Ten does. So I do feel like it would be more on the athletic side of things. Just what that criteria is, I'm not 100% sure. Now, could they also expand just to help um, stay in the same loop as the Big Ten? Absolutely. I think that they can. But once again, I think the only way that you're going to see the SEC expand right now is if it's the right set of circumstances for whatever team or teams it is that they decide to add.
Okay, and so you touched upon a little bit on some of the criteria, mostly athletics, but what do like I guess I'm just wondering in terms of what's going to be driving this ultimately, if and when, like, will it just be they feel like they have to expand in order to keep up? Is it going to be defensive? Is it going to, try to keep the Big Ten away from other big brands? Or is it just going to be, hey, if you add value, we'll keep adding as long as there's value add?
Obviously, football is going to be driving everything. But I do think the SEC is they really pride themselves on being competitive over all the sports. So I do feel like they're going to get a team that is not just going to compete in football, but is going to compete in all sports. But football is without a doubt going to be the driving factor for all of it.
Okay. All right. And do you think basketball plays at all, or just a much smaller percentage?
It's going to be a much smaller percentage, but it will play a little bit of a factor having basketball success as well. But definitely, football is the number one thing that they're going to be looking at, just like any other sport would.
Sure, sure. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get into it and grade the teams, pull up and take a look at them. Before we do, I got to give Michael a shout out here. he's agreed to record with me. He's doing this right after work. He's really pulling out all the stops. So I really appreciate you making time to join me. And I do recommend anybody to go check out his show, give him some love, and especially get some insights on the SEC and another perspective in college football. And like I said, member of the College Huddle. So really appreciate all you coming on and doing this at odd hours of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I would obviously love to be in my studio or even back in my hotel rooms. I'm out of town working right now, but you know what? Sometimes we gotta do what we got to do to make sure we get the content out there. So appreciate the shout out and thank you for having me on doing this. So.
All right, so here are the teams that we're going to grade. We're mostly looking at a lot of ACC since that's the conference that kind of seems like it's going to be the linchpin to the next wave of realignment. But we do have some other schools in here too that we'll get to, including Notre Dame. But what we're doing is we're going to be looking at these schools and ranking them 1 through 10 on brand, geography, cultural fit, and football competitiveness. And that'll give us an overall average between these. Not super scientific, but I think most of us can probably, going through discussing this, we can get probably pretty close with these estimates without getting like real official hard numbers and metrics from, all kinds of sources everywhere. So I think it was a pretty good sense of direction, at least, of where each of these schools would stand in terms of realignment with the SEC, hopefully by the time we're done with this. And as Michael mentioned, we did an episode of this for the Big Ten already, and I'll put a link to that so you can go check that one out. And we went in depth on those schools, many of the same schools. And now we're going to see how they stack up here with the SEC. And so let's start with Notre Dame, because while everyone, I think, feels like if they're ever to join a conference, the Big Ten would make the most sense. Obviously, right now, the ACC would make sense in a lot of ways, too, because of their relationship with them. But assuming there was realignment, people think Big Ten if they're ever going to join. But they are too big of a brand not to at least include in this conversation. So let's take a look at Notre Dame in terms of expansion for the SEC. So brand, I think we can, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think we can both, go ahead and put a 10 here. Is that for Notre Dame on brand?
Yeah, I would say definitely around a 9 or a 10 because they've got the brand. They've got the firiness that a football program needs for their program, and I mean that part would definitely fit into the SEC. So I'd say definitely a 9. We'll leave it at a 10 right there.
Okay. And then geography. So this is something we didn't talk about yet, but the SEC's been used really as a talking point. The fact that they have their whole conference is connected, that all of them are contiguous states, that there isn't a break in it, that it feels, even though they're not really all southeast, they all are southern schools and connected in that sense. So Notre Dame, not southern, or sorry, Indiana, not southern, but the tip of it does just touch Kentucky. So technically they qualify if that is something that the SEC is going for. So how do you feel like Notre Dame ranks in terms of geography?
Yeah, so I do feel like the SEC is going to try to keep that general type geography, that southeastern portion of the United States, and I know we have kind of expanded out into Texas now, Oklahoma, making it more of like a Southwest. Maybe it'd be more like just a Southern conference or something like that. So I do think geography is going to play a part of it. I don't see the SEC expanding into the Northeast or going out and picking up at Washington State or an Oregon State, something like that, just going across country. So as far as geography goes, I would say for Notre Dame, I'd actually put it as low as a 4. I just don't think that they're going to expand much higher than Kentucky. I mean, Missouri is, about the same area as Kentucky, right in there. I'd say that's probably as far north as they decide to venture. So I'm going to put it at a 4 for the geography for Notre Dame.
Yeah, and depending on what criteria you're looking at, because you're not only are you looking at, in the case of the SEC, looking at kind of being more regional, but also if you are to expand into a new state, does how much does Indiana really bring you? Now, obviously, Notre Dame's brand is bigger than a single state, but in terms of geography, they at least touch, not too close, but at least you know. Um, but yeah, really not Southern at all. And so that goes right into this next question: how good of a cultural fit are they? Obviously, you have um, former head coach now at LSU. So that could lead to some fun games and rivalries. But outside of that, like, how does Notre Dame fit in culturally?
So it's funny that you bring up Brian Kelly there, going from Notre Dame to LSU. And this is why I'm going to put cultural fit a little bit lower than some people would probably think. It's because you see how much that Brian Kelly is trying to fit in, so to speak, at LSU by changing the way that he just acts in general, how he presents himself, and things like that. So I'm going to say a cultural fit. I'm going to just put it right in the middle and say a 5. I feel like that their fans, the way that everything goes around their campus would probably fit a little bit more towards the SEC. But I just feel like it fits a lot better with the Big Ten type culture than it does the SEC.
Hmm. I'm actually surprised you have them that high, but I could see that there is definitely that passion there that you can see play into it. So, but yeah, definitely not one that not a school, not a brand that screams SEC by any means. But football competitiveness now, they have turned it on as of late, even though they've been a lot of like they start seasons really high, then end kind of not quite on the high note, but you can't deny, making it to the national championship game last year. So how would you rank them on this?
Yeah, so football competitiveness, I'm going to go based off of pretty much the last 20 years, which is basically what I remember in my lifetime. Notre Dame has always been a team that they're pretty much guaranteed to win at least 8 games, maybe even 9 games each year, which in my book is very competitive. Obviously, coming off a year where they made the national championship game in a year that I would not have picked them to go, especially after that upset loss to Northern Illinois. So I don't want to put them at a 10 just because, we've seen teams like Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia as of recently, that it's just year in, year out there, going for a title. So I am going to put them at a 9, just kind of on that next level below, but they're definitely very high up there in the football competitiveness.
Yeah, I'd say 8 or 9 is kind of where I'm at. So I'll settle with you there on 9 and give them an overall score of 7, which really like a C minus. So, I mean, really not terrible here, but and I'm sure the SEC would love to have a brand like Notre Dame, but not the most obvious one. Now, let's get to the aforementioned UNC here. So they seem to be a brand that, and I said this in the Big Ten show, that it's kind of interesting because as we'll get to Florida State and Clemson and some of these others, they make sense for some reasons for the Big Ten and for different reasons for the SEC in some ways. And in some ways, their strengths for the Big Ten are actually the knock against them for the SEC. Whereas UNC kind of check all the same boxes for both the Big Ten and the SEC. It's kind of they're appealing for all the same reasons, so I don't think necessarily UNC is like, the belle of the ball in terms of schools that are out there, but in terms of boxes that you check, that really they just kind of check all the right boxes, making them what I think, and we'll see how we score them here. I think will be a pretty competitive score here for both the Big Ten and the SEC. So I think they'll be kind of the linchpin in causing the rest of the dominoes to fall in the next wave of realignment on what ends up happening with UNC, because I could see them going either way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just starting off with the brand there for North Carolina, I am gonna go. I'm not gonna quite give it a 10, but it's very close. I'm gonna give it a 9. That North Carolina brand, as far as the football side of things goes, it doesn't quite do it for everybody. Here lately, they've been a lot better, but they also are not that premier type brand. Now, what helps bring them up is, we mentioned earlier that as far as other sports goes, that also does play I feel like it's going to play a factor in a school that the SEC would be willing to go and get. And because of basketball pretty much year in and year out being a top team, baseball making numerous College World Series as well, that's going to jump it up a little bit in my book to give it that 9 that I think North Carolina is in the brand department.
Yeah, UNC is definitely one of those brands, and that no matter where you go, you'll see people rocking UNC gear. I remember, especially maybe it was just the time, but I remember like in the '90s as a kid, and it was really popular to see people sporting UNC. But I wouldn't attribute most of that to football. Now it will be interesting to see what impact Bill Belichick has, and whether it's a lasting impact or whether it's short-lived, if it's really just tied to him and kind of his celebrity and the circus around that, or if he really converts UNC's brand into a serious football school.
Yeah, exactly. I'm interested to see, what he's going to do there. I don't necessarily have high hopes just because the college game is much different from the pro game, even though it is starting to transition into that with all the money side of things with NIL and transfer portal being more like free agency. But we also saw towards the end of his time at Notre Dame, or not at Notre Dame, at New England, the game was kind of passing him by. He didn't have Tom Brady anymore. So without having a stud like that at quarterback, what is he going to be able to do as a head coach? So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. So moving on to the geography part of it here, I would put this. So I'm going to put it as a 9 because I feel like there is a couple of other schools here that would fit just a little bit better. But obviously, they're adjacent to Tennessee there. You got South Carolina right below them as well. They would still fit in that range right there of the geography. So I think that they would be a great fit geography wise, not going outside of the footprint too far that the SEC would want to keep. So, like I said, not quite a 10 in my book because I feel like there's some other more qualified candidates, but a 9 is definitely where I would have.
Okay. See, I would put them at a 10 because they are Southeast. They're right there. They fit regionally, but they are a new state, so they expand your territory while staying true to the SEC roots. But then also, they North Carolina it's not a huge state, but it is a pretty big state with some decent markets in it. So I would say that. I don't know. I do think it's pretty attractive in terms of geography, but I think 9 is solid. How about cultural though? So geographically it fits, but culturally, are they an SEC school?
So culturally, I feel like the football side of things, once again, it's they're good. Their fans, they're coming around on it, but are they like these crazy SEC fans that we see from all the other schools like Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, all those? I wouldn't say that. So that's the one spot that I would say they're kind of lacking a little bit more. I would go cultural fit, probably around I would say a 7.5. So let's round it to an 8.
Generous.
Because I do feel like that they still do fit pretty well culturally whenever you get around to some of the other sports, like especially basketball. The basketball side of things, they're crazy just like any other SEC fan. Um, the football side could be better. Now, do I think that if they join the SEC, it would be better? Yeah, probably so. I feel like they would feel like that they have more to play for in the SEC than they do in the ACC. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking about it wrong there. So I would say an 8 on that one, and I might be stretching that a little bit. It could be closer to a 7 on the cultural fit side.
I I would have put them even lower than that. So I'm going to round them down since you're stuck between.
Okay.
I'm going with 7 because I still think football is a big component of that, and I just don't think they are there. But you're right. The atmosphere for basketball is up there, with anybody. So, um, All right, and then football competitiveness. Obviously, they've put some good teams out there, but they're obviously not like knocking at the door of the playoffs every year.
Yeah, I would put them around a 7 for football competitiveness because even in the conference of the ACC, where it's more wide open than a lot of other conferences. I mean, I know Clemson's kind of dominated as of recently, but I don't even believe that they've made a conference title game, or if they have, it's been won over the last several years. So in a conference where really it's wide open for who's going to be that second place team. I just don't feel like North Carolina has been quite up to the standard they need to be for that football competitiveness to be any higher than a 7.
Yeah, and even that might be generous, but they have competitive teams year in and year out. So generally, but okay, so an 8, that's a pretty solid score. Let's go to FSU, who's another one who's obviously in the mix, in centered, or all the next realignment is centered around. And so Florida State is an interesting one because in some ways they make so much sense, but in other ways, it just seems like possibly the SEC might just want to pass. So let's talk about that a little.
Yeah, so as far as the brand for FSU, I'm not going to quite put them in a 10. I'm going to put them around a 9 for the brand. Now they've got the they've got the atmosphere. They've got they're a big name in Florida. Obviously, Florida is the biggest school, biggest name school in Florida. But the next school that you think about, it's either Florida State or Miami. And honestly, over the course of recency bias anyway, it's been Florida State has been that next school over Miami. So I would say the brand is there. I give them a 9 on that. I can't quite give them a 10, and I just feel that any lower than an 8 is definitely a insult to them. I feel like a 9 is a good fit there for the brand.
No, I think 9 solid. They're not like true blue blood status, but they are kind of that next tier. So absolutely. And geography, obviously they're already in SEC territory, but that also kind of plays against them.
Yeah, I mean they're in Florida. Florida obviously has the top tier whenever it comes to the recruiting grounds there. But as of recently, Florida State has had a little bit more success than Florida has in some years. Obviously, last year is definitely not one of those years. But I'm still going to put the geography here at a 10 because they're right in the middle of SEC territory. You also got the rivalry there with Florida that you play every single year. So all it would do at this point is just, especially with the SEC going to a 9-game schedule, all it would do at this point is just basically add them into the conference, and you're still playing them every single year. So I think the geography there, being especially deep in the Southeast like that, is a 10.
Okay, because some people argue that because they've had that. I don't know if it's official rule or that gentleman's agreement that they're not going to expand into states that they're already in, that Florida may not want another, rival in state in the conference, giving them an advantage, taking away some of their own advantage of recruiting in state. Do you feel like any of that plays against them, or that because they're right there that it just makes sense?
I feel like it could play against them a little bit, but we also just saw the same thing with Texas A&M and Texas. Texas A&M did not want Texas coming into the conference. I mean, they fought tooth and nail trying to keep them out, and ultimately it didn't matter. The money was right, and everybody else voted them in pretty much. Other than there might have been one or two other schools that were against it, but I feel like that it would kind of be the same deal. Florida might not want them in, but I feel like ultimately, if the money's right and everybody else votes them in, that it wouldn't matter ultimately with all that as far as them already being in Florida.
Fair enough. I do think there's a difference of Florida, one of the founding members and one of the biggest brands in the conference, objecting versus A&M, who hasn't done anything and is a newer.
That's a fair point there too.
But your point taken. If the money's there, it could make sense. And you're right, it does bring another rivalry game that's being played anyway, especially now going to 9 in-conference games, kind of helps that situation out a little bit. So that could actually play to Florida State's favor, because as much as
Yeah.
the Gators might hate Florida State, I think they certainly want to keep that rivalry game going, I would assume. I don't know. We've seen others broken up like Bedlam and stuff because of realignment, so you never know. But how about cultural fit? Obviously, like we already talked about, right there in the heart of the SEC.
So cultural fit, I feel like as far as the atmosphere of the games, the atmosphere of the fans, the craziness and everything, I'd be remiss not to put them at a 10. But here's why I'm not going to put them at a 10. And it's something that you and JR kind of talked about a little bit. They are trying to force their way out of the ACC and get into another conference on their own. It's not the conferences, the Big Ten, the SEC, or even I'll throw the Big 12 in there too. It's not any of them seeking out Florida State to come and get them. Florida State wants out of the ACC, and they've made that known. And I feel like that's going to go against them. So I'm going to put this. I'm going to throw that against the cultural fit right here, which is why I'm going to put them down as far as a 6, as far as the cultural fit goes. I just feel like it makes sense for the SEC to get Florida State, but with the way that they are acting, trying to get out of the ACC, I just feel like it makes them unappealing. And that's why I put the cultural fit down as low as I did.
Okay, fair enough. And how about football competitiveness? Because FSU's been kind of all over the place.
FSU is either really good or they're really bad. And I mean, going back, I said I'm going to be basing all this off of the past 20 years. I can think of 2013 when Jameis Winston and then went undefeated, won the national title game. Year after, went back to the playoffs, ended up getting beat there. And then what happened to Florida State after that? They fell off an absolute cliff. And now they were undefeated. What was that, 2 seasons ago? Ended up missing out on the playoffs because of quarterback getting hurt. That really hurt their chances. And then last year going 2-10. I just feel like there's no in between with Florida State. So I'm going to put them. I'll put them at a 6 because their highs have been very high, but their lows just bring it way down as well. So I'm going to put them kind of right in the middle.
Okay. I would almost argue, and I think your score's fair just because they have kind of been all over the place, although winning a national championship at all in the last 20 years, I would say is very good.
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, my school has it. And the last time that we won one, it was against Florida State, was in 98. So.
Yeah. So, I would say that should count for something, but also I think being hot or cold in some ways could play to their favor, because if you don't necessarily want, if you're an SEC program or, administration trying to make this decision, you don't necessarily want another juggernaut in your conference, but you want someone who can be respectable, go out there and be good. And so, that Florida State had big droughts, or I don't know about big droughts, but like, they had ups and downs, but showed that, hey, even when we're down, we can pull back out of it and all of a sudden be super competitive again. I mean, arguably they should have been in the 14 playoff in, was it 23? And so, they've shown that they can have that potential, even if they've had, some down years, they can pull back out of that, kind of like LSU, how they kind of disappear and then they're back, or whatever, Auburn even. And so, I would say that's almost more beneficial than having another team that's going to be like a Bama, that's every single year. That I don't know. I guess it just depends on how you look at it. But yeah, they've certainly had some hot and cold seasons. So anyway, 7.75, still better than Notre Dame, right there behind UNC. Is that more or less how you'd expect those two to shake out, with UNC edging FSU?
I believe so. I feel like that. I will say, whenever we get through these teams, I will say who I feel like the SEC should go after. But I would definitely have UNC over Florida State.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, you're right. We'll save the rest of that for the end and see how all this shakes up. Let's get to Clemson because they're also interesting. Some of the same pros and cons here as Florida State, but brand, really good brand, but it's a lot of that has been in like recent memory. Do you think they have like the staying power as some of these other brands?
So I actually think that they do. Um, I think that the recent years they do play a big factor in it. But Clemson's always been one of those under the radar type teams, even in the years whenever they were kind of mediocre. So I think the brand is there. And I would even throw, the other or the other sports as well are really coming around. Clemson basketball has made the Sweet 16, might even made the Elite Eight one of the last couple of years as well. So the basketball team's going around. Baseball is year in and year out good as well. They just got a great brand overall. I'm actually going to put them at a 10 for their brand.
All right. I mean, they've certainly done enough over the last, I don't know, at least 15 years to, I think, earn that. And okay, I would definitely say like this upcoming generation probably looks at Clemson as a blue blood, even though some of us maybe who kind of were fans prior to this major run maybe don't look at them quite on that level, but that's definitely shifting. So I don't think 10 is completely unreasonable. How about geography?
Geography, that's another one of those I would have to say a 10. It's right in the middle of southeastern United States. You've got South Carolina that's already in the state of South Carolina, but once again, that's one of those in-state rivalries. And you want to talk about an underrated rivalry as far as the fierceness of that rivalry goes. When you look, Clemson has been a very good team over the last few years. South Carolina more of a mediocre type team. South Carolina's got a 3-game winning streak on Clemson right now. So even in down years for either one of those teams, it's very competitive, and I feel like that it'd be another one of those things where South Carolina, they're not a one of the old time teams as they were brought into the SEC back in '92, I believe it was. So they're not one of the founding members. But I don't know if you would get a lot of pushback from South Carolina fans and from the school itself if they were to bring Clemson in. I feel like that they would actually welcome Clemson in there pretty well because it's not like the Texas A&M Texas type relationship there, and even the Florida State type relationship. Even though they absolutely hate each other with the rivalry, I feel like that they would welcome Clemson in.
Okay, all right, and so for cultural fit, I mean, that kind of plays into that too. How would you rank them there?
Cultural fit, I would say that I don't want to just give 10s across the board. And I do feel like they're putting cultural fit at I'm going to say an 8 here for Clemson. But I could very easily put a 9 there for Clemson as well. I feel like they fit very well in the SEC. I mean, with how their program is run as a whole, with Dabo Sweeney and the athletic department, the school itself, it's run more like an SEC school than some of these other ones that we have mentioned already, and some of the other ones that we will talk about. So I feel like the cultural fit is there. But I also don't want to put them at a 10 because I feel like that there's still some stuff that they can improve upon to have that fit of an SEC school.
Yeah. And football competitiveness?
I mean, how could we not put them at a 10 after the last several years and winning national titles twice against arguably the best college football coach ever in Nick Saban? I believe, both of those games were won against Alabama, and then your runner up to one of the best teams to ever step foot on the field in LSU in 2019. I mean, the competitiveness is absolutely there in recency bias. So, I mean, how is it not a 10?
Yeah. Great. So Clemson's solid here. You're making a very strong case for Clemson. All right, let's go to Miami. Their brand obviously had their heyday, but still a strong brand. Maybe not what they used to be, but how would you rank them?
Um, I would say Miami's brand is somewhere around a. I feel like I'm still kind of being generous here. I would put their brand at about a 7. Um, I just don't. I don't feel like the brand is there. You know, if we're talking early 2000s, and in the late 90s, yeah, Miami's brand is there. But what has Miami done in the last 20 years that's worth talking about? I mean, you had Cam Ward last year that goes number 1 overall, lighting up the stat book. But you know, you've got a defense that can't stop a cold, and you're having to put up, you know, 30, 40 points a game to try to beat somebody. And even then, you're barely beating them. You've got Mario Cristobal, who was supposed to be the saving grace when he came in. That I don't trust the guy. I really don't. And that's, I'm sure you probably remember the Georgia Tech game a few years ago where all they had to do was just kneel on the ball and they run it, fumble it. Georgia Tech ends up winning the ball game after that. Um, I mean, the brand to me is not there. And I've actually got a thing about the cultural fit that I'll save my comments for
No, no,
why I
go.
don't
We'll
feel.
come back to geography. Go right into it.
All right. So cultural fit, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put them at a 4 for the cultural fit. And I'll tell you why. A lot of it has to do with the fact that their stadium is not on campus. They play at Hard Rock Stadium, which is where the Dolphins play. It's not on campus. And to be totally honest, it's so hard to have a good culture whenever you don't have a stadium on campus like that, because even though you've got a good fan base, you know, it's something about that campus environment. And you know, every single one of the SEC schools except Vanderbilt really has some sort of good environment there at each game. I would even say Kentucky and Missouri overall, they have a good environment, even though it's not the best in the world. But you look at the Tennessees, you look at the Georgias, the Alabamas, the South Carolinas, Floridas. What do you think of whenever you talk about them and their stadium? It's the absolute insane environment that the home crowd gives. And I just don't feel like you get that from Miami because of them not being on campus.
Yeah, and I would also add on to that Miami is, even though well, it's just a different world from these other parts of the state. What do they say like about Florida? Like the more north you go in Florida, the further south you get. Like it becomes, deeper south, and so you get down to
Yeah.
Miami. It really is another world. Maybe doesn't feel quite as much like the Southeastern Conference there. You already touched upon football competitiveness. You want to go ahead and give us our score there?
Yeah, football competitiveness, I'm gonna put it honestly, I would say a 4 on that one as well. It's just below average. Um, Miami is a school that I feel like should be better than they are at football each year, especially when you consider what they were at one time in the early 2000s and the late 90s and all that. You saw what they could be, and you see what they are now, what they have been over the last 20 years. The competitiveness is not there. You know, the last couple of years, you could say, well, they built it back up some. Okay, show me that you can stay there before I put you any higher on that competitiveness scale.
Yeah. All right. So, what are your scathing comments about geography? And maybe I we touched upon it already, but
So geography is the one area that I would put them a little bit higher. Now I'm not going to put them directly at a 10. Um, I would I would still put it at a 9 because Florida is, you know, right there in the heart of the Southeastern Conference. Obviously, the geography is there. It would be easy to just add them in, and you wouldn't worry about expanding outside of that footprint that you want to keep. But I just feel like Miami once again is kind of in a different world. Um, and and maybe I'm just leaning too much into this. Well, their stadium's not on campus type deal, but to me that plays a big part in it. The geography to me is there because of their location, as far as what state they're in. But as far as everything else, that's what brings it down to a 9 for me. I could even go an 8 but I'll keep it at a 9 for geography because they're in the heart of the Southeast.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, Miami's a different world. In SEC, you think of a lot of these schools are in these smaller college towns, and I don't know. There's just a kind of a different feel to that versus being in a big city like Miami is, and that major hub. All right, so let's go to UVA now, and the reason why they're on the list, they're not talked about as much in realignment. When they are, they're usually because they're linked in some way with UNC. Some feel like I've heard talk about. I don't know if this is still as big of a theory or I guess a point of view on the matter, but that they would be linked. That UNC might want to bring UVA along with them, and because they are still there, that next to expanding, but next to that southeast footprint, that I thought they'd be at least worth discussing. So UVA, tell me how you would score them on brand.
So obviously, brand. A lot of this is weighed on football, and football at UVA is almost non-existent, really. So that's going to bring it way down. But here's what I will say: basketball is big at UVA. It's dropped off over the last couple of years, but they've got a national title in there. Baseball has always been big at UVA, especially as of recently. I believe they have two national titles, if I'm not mistaken, in the last 10 to 15 years. So I am going to weigh the football side of things more heavily there. Um, but that basketball and baseball does bring it up some. I'm just going to put them directly in the middle at a 5. The brand just really is not there as far as the football side of things goes. Yeah, Virginia's just not one that I consider a just big brand.
Yeah, I think that's fair. How about geography?
So geography, obviously you're kind of moving up the coast a little bit, getting a little bit further out of the southeast side of things than you would be if you got, say, North Carolina. Um, I would say that Virginia is still a decent fit, and here's what I'll also say about the geography side of things. That didn't mention earlier. So, the media market used to be a big thing whenever you were looking for new schools. This was before streaming, so you're looking at the regional side of things as far as the media market. What market are you trying to get into that you don't have a piece of?
Yeah.
And Virginia would be a big media market to get into. It's somewhere that you're not at. Same thing as North Carolina, where if I was re-ranking some of these teams because of a market that you're not in, well, you're already in Florida, you're already in South Carolina, so that would bring down those other schools. But with streaming, that media market is not as big of a thing as it used to be.
Mm.
So that's going to bring it down some for me as far as geography goes. Obviously, as far as where they're actually located, it helps bring it up some. I'm going to go with um, I'm gonna put it at a 7 because it's still semi in that southeastern type of region, but it's not, too far out either.
Yeah. I mean, it is south of the Mason-Dixon line, so
Yes.
I live in Virginia, so I mean, I do think it qualifies as southeast, but yeah, it would expand the footprint. So I think in terms of fit, I'm with, I think Virginia and UNC or North Carolina both make a lot of sense for the SEC. But now cultural fit. Now you kind of talked about this when it comes to brand, but with their football. So when Bronco Mendenhall, former BYU coach, was at UVA, we'd like to go to one game a year, and not necessarily. I'm a supporter of Virginia schools, but I wouldn't call myself a fan of Virginia schools. But so we'd like to go and cheer on Bronco and UVA at the time. And boy, the atmosphere there was not. I mean, it was not what I would expect from the SEC environment. I also traveled to a Tennessee game, and that was an environment, and UVA was not even in the same ballpark, to use that expression, as Tennessee. So I don't know. How would you rank them in this in
Yeah,
this category?
Yeah, cultural fit for me, I'm going to be very low on the cultural fit for Virginia. I'm going to go as low as a three, and honestly, I could put it at two. The fit just isn't there overall for an SEC type school. There's not a lot I can say about it. Virginia in my lifetime has not been a good football team at all. Um, and you mentioned it. I've never been to a game in Virginia, but you can tell a lot of things just watching it on TV, and there's not a raucous environment at UGA or at UVA. So yeah, a three is where I'm going to put that.
Okay, and you mentioned haven't been competitive. Granted, they did make it to an Orange Bowl where they got beat down by Florida, but that was kind of the extent of it. Outside of that year, I mean, they have been down. So where would you rank them on football competitiveness?
I'm going to put them. So I wouldn't say that they've been even on Miami standards. That Now they do kind of rival Miami a little bit as far as after those early 2000s type years, but I would say that overall they've been a little bit worse than Miami. So I am going to put them at a three as far as football competitiveness goes.
Yeah, I think you're a little harsh on Miami in that regard, but yeah, I do think UVA has been overall outside of kind of a rare successful season, which making it to a New Year's Six Bowl is a really good accomplishment. But outside of that, that's been some pretty bad football. Now, Virginia Tech, on the other hand, at least from the state of Virginia perspective, a lot of people feel like they were always the better fit for the SEC than UVA. So let's see where you come down on this. How do you look at Tech in terms of brand?
Yeah, so the brand for Virginia Tech obviously has taken a little bit of a hit since Mr. Frank Beamer is moved on as head coach. They just hadn't been quite as competitive since he's been gone. But the brand is still there. I would say that it's trending downward. So I'm gonna put them. I would kind of put them on the same tier as Miami because I would say that Miami's starting to trend back up some, where Virginia Tech is starting to trend down. Where, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would say, Miami's probably at a five or a six right now. Virginia Tech's at about an eight. So I would say a seven for Virginia Tech on the brand.
I think that's fair. I think when they look decent, they still get the benefit of the doubt. Like they were a perennial top 25 team, usually
Yes.
getting that benefit of the doubt. Um, Generally not living quite up to the billing, but still ending seasons pretty strong. So we'll see if they can get back to that point. But okay, geography, I imagine kind of the same as UVA here.
Yeah, I would say about the same. And I apologize for not having my exact geography right, but Virginia Tech in Blacksburg is actually a little bit closer than Virginia's campus is, relative to like Tennessee, for instance, is it not?
Yeah, I would say maybe an hour and a half closer or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna just factor that in and put them at an eight for the geography. I would still put it at a seven, but that could play a little bit of a part there. You're a little bit closer to that Tennessee type market as well. But yeah, I'm gonna keep it at a seven there. Um, Cultural fit. This is where I'm gonna have a big difference than I did for Virginia. Um, Cultural fit. I'm gonna put them. Uh, Honestly, might have sevens across the board here, depending on what I put for football competitiveness. I'm going to put it as a seven for the cultural fit. Um, I've never been to a Virginia Tech game, but obviously, what are they known for? That is, when they come out of the stadium, they're coming out to Enter Sandman. And Enter Sandman, the way that Virginia Tech does it there, it's electrifying. It's a top 10, maybe even a top five football entrance in all of college football. Um, and that's what you think of. Their fans, they're very loud at their stadium. They are all about their team. So I would definitely put them closer to an SEC type environment than I would Virginia. Um, but still, to me, there's still a big difference between Virginia Tech and Tennessee, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, those schools there when it comes to just the culture overall there at the school.
You're listing environments and you put South Carolina high up on that list.
Oh yeah. So, South Carolina, a night game at Williams-Brice Stadium is a, I won't put it a top 10 environment, but I would say a top 15 environment in all of college football when you go to a night game at Williams-Brice Stadium.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Um, and then football competitiveness. Again, we talked about this a little bit, but where would you rank them?
So you mentioned it. They were pretty much a perennial top 25 team year in and year out, especially under Frank Beamer. They've fallen off as of lately, but even then, they've still had some decent enough seasons to be right there in the top 25. Um, I mean, I hate to do this, but I'm going to put it at a 7 there as well. They have not competed for championships, but they haven't been terrible either. They've just kind of been right there in the middle. They've been in the mix of things as far as the competitiveness side of things goes. So yeah, I'm gonna keep it at a 7.
Fair enough. Okay, not a bad score for Tech there. So Duke is another one that I think benefits a lot because of its tie to UNC, which is why they're on this list. Oftentimes they're kind of poo-pooed and they're talked about a school that could very well get left behind with like a Wake Forest or something like that. But I think Duke is worth considering at least looking at because of that tie with UNC, because of that rivalry. Anyone thinking, hey, we get UNC and we bring Duke with them, we can have a top basketball rivalry in conference. I think is at least exploring. So let's see. I want to do this one. So humor me here with Duke in terms of scoring them on this one. So how would you rate Duke in terms of brand?
So Duke, as of I would even say 10 years ago, the brand was very low. Duke is not known as a football school at
No,
all.
no.
They're pretty much strictly men's basketball, and that's a big thanks to Coach K. But you know what? Duke is overall trending upward when it comes to football. Basketball is pretty much stayed at that tier that they've been at. And even baseball is trending up. Um, I would say as of right now, they rival the brand of Virginia Tech. So I'm going to put them right at a 7 for a brand. That might be a little bit generous. Maybe they could be more towards a 6, but I feel like the way that they're trending upward, I'll put them up to that 7 instead of a 6.
And so a lot of that is weighted because they've been so bad in football that brings the brand down. Whereas I would argue they are a national brand, but it is pretty much all because of basketball.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then geography.
Geography, I would put them I would put them probably at an 8 because you're right in the middle of Southeastern Conference territory. But, when you think of, cities in the Southeast, Durham, North Carolina does not stand out the way that Chapel Hill stands out. That, even though it's more of a smaller town, that Clemson stands out. Even Blacksburg stands out more than Durham does. So the location being, right there in the middle of North Carolina, you're in the middle of Southeastern Territory, that brings it up. But when you say the name Durham, that doesn't just ring the bell as much as some of these other cities that some of the other schools are based out of, if that makes sense.
Okay, fair enough. And then cultural fit with Duke.
So once again, football is weighted heavily here when it comes to a cultural fit. If we were just ranking off of basketball, this is a 10. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they call the student section the Cameron Crazies for a reason.
Yeah.
So if we were ranking off of basketball, this is a 10, and there might not be another 10 on this board except for maybe North Carolina's. But even then, I would say that Duke's on a tier by themselves whenever it comes to basketball. But when it comes to football, even though once again I mentioned it's the brand, the school, the teams, all that, they're trending upward. The cultural fit just isn't that of an SEC type school. I would say probably a 4 on the cultural fits for Duke. little bit lower. They're I would even say that a school that's been in the SEC for such a long time, like Vanderbilt's, one of those higher academic type schools, like what Duke is, like what Vanderbilt is. Vanderbilt's not really a good fit as far as the culture goes for the Southeastern Conference. They were just kind of grandfathered into it. Um, and I wouldn't, if you were asking me about Vanderbilt, if they were outside the conference, I'd put them kind of on the same tier as Duke whenever it comes to a cultural fit there. It's not one that fits in with a lot of the other schools.
It's funny you said that because right before you said that, I was just thinking about Vanderbilt in regards to that comparison with Duke. So it's funny you made that exact. You took the thought out of my brain and said that. So all right, and then football competitiveness. I don't suspect this will be very pretty.
Yeah, I can't put it very high just because of I mentioned at the beginning, 20 years. That's what I'm basing it off of. The lifetime that I actually remember watching football. Recency bias does help some because they have been trending upward. They've had some 9-win seasons, when Mike Elko was there. They've been competing towards the top of the conference, but they're not competing for championships. But when you take some of those years even earlier, I'm gonna put them. I've got to put them lower than Virginia because Virginia has been better than Duke. I would say a 2 there, but trending upward for sure with that football competitiveness.
Okay, so not a good score. But what if the condition for UNC was, hey, you got to bring our arch rival along with us?
So say that part again.
What if the condition for getting UNC was also bringing Duke along with them? Not a great score alone, but do you think UNC is a big enough prize to compensate for some of that?
I don't think it would be because I think that the only way, at least as of right now, that the SEC is going to bring anybody in is if they are absolutely sure that it's a good fit. And I just don't feel like that if the conditions were, all right, we're North Carolina, you want us, but the only way you can get us is to also bring in Duke. I just don't know if they would bring that in because of how heavily football is weighed into it. If it was basketball, though, yeah, absolutely. Bring that on. That's arguably the biggest rivalry game in all of college basketball. But I just don't know if it weighs heavily enough to say, all right, we want North Carolina. They're asking for Duke. Yeah, let's go get both of them.
Okay. All right. All right. So let's move on to last couple schools from the ACC. We got Georgia Tech.
So, Georgia Tech. The brand is just it's not there. Georgia Tech is not the same school that they were back in the 80s, 90s. I don't remember a time where Georgia Tech was really competitive. I mean, obviously, before my lifetime, Georgia Tech was one of those teams that, they were year in, year out a tough team to play against. But the brand now, it's just not there. I would probably put it on the same tier as Virginia and say a 5. I might even go a 4 on that one, but I'll keep it at a 5, right in the middle.
Okay. 5. I agree. Their brand just doesn't have the same cachet that maybe it even once did. But geography in Atlanta, Georgia.
So geography, I'm going to say what it should be, and then I'll tell you what it is. It should be a 10 because Georgia Tech, they're in downtown Atlanta, and Atlanta is one of the biggest media markets in the entire U.S. But here's the thing is Georgia themselves, Georgia Bulldogs, they play so much in Atlanta. They're all the time trying to have neutral site games in Atlanta. They're the state's big team and all that. Georgia pretty much takes over that Atlanta market. You don't hear much from Georgia Tech. So that's going to bring it down for me just a little bit, but they're still in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, which helps them out. So I'm going to put them at an 8 because of their actual location, but because of Georgia just taking over their market in Atlanta, that's what's going to bring them down from what should absolutely be a 10.
Yeah. I understand why they Georgia tries to play in Atlanta a lot, but man, there's something about being at home in the college town in that environment that you miss out on in those types of games. So,
Exactly.
All right, cultural fit.
Cultural fit, once again, it's just not there. You know, back in back in the early days of college football when Georgia Tech was a member of the Southeastern Conference, yeah, they were absolutely a cultural fit. But times have changed now, and it took Georgia Tech until what the um, almost the 2010s, and honestly, even going into the 2010s, they still ran that old triple option style offense. Um, and that old stuff just, even though it's fun to watch, I love watching that. It's not what gets it done, and it took Georgia Tech so long to actually evolve into some sort of new style offense that they're just behind the eight ball overall. So I'm going to put them once again kind of in the same tier as Virginia whenever it comes to a cultural fit, and I'm going to say a a 3 on that one.
Okay. And then lastly, football competitiveness.
I'm going to kind of rival. So I'm going to rival more of Miami on this one as far as football competitiveness. Georgia Tech, they haven't been very good in my lifetime, but they've also pulled off a couple of stunners here and there that brings it up. I would say probably a 4 in the football competitive side of things. Now, over the last 2, maybe 3 years, I will say it's a slight trend upward in the football competitiveness. But you gotta show me that it's gonna keep continuing that way before I can add in a higher level there for the football competitiveness.
And I think that's fair, but I do think they're trending up, but you're right. You got to kind of prove it and that it's sustainable. All right, NC State. I know we've already covered a couple schools in North Carolina, but in some regards, kind of like the comparison between UVA and Tech, I think NC State can kind of make a case that, at least their fans would make the case and do make the case that they'd be the better fit of those North Carolina schools for the SEC. So let's see where you come down on this in terms of brand. How do you look at NC State?
It's funny you bring that up as far as the fans go, because not only is it the fans, but NC State has the backing of the governor. And that's why they're going to take a little bit of a hit for me overall, kind of like Florida State did earlier, because they came up with the governor basically said that if it does come down to the SEC, and I'm assuming that it's probably the same thing with the Big Ten, but I haven't heard this for sure. But I know at the SEC, they basically said if you're going to take North Carolina, you have to take North Carolina State too. It's a package deal there. You can't have one without the other. So I'm going to knock that down when we get to the cultural fit part. But the brand, it's just not there. North Carolina they're the state school. They're the ones that when you hear North Carolina, you think immediately North Carolina Tar Heels. You don't think NC States. They've been competitive at times, but they've really fallen off as of recently, except for every once in a while they have a good year. The brand as a whole, I'm gonna put it right in the middle of Virginia Tech and Virginia. I'm going to say a 6 there. Virginia Tech's definitely got a better brand, but I would say NC State's is a little bit better than Virginia's is.
That's right where I would have put them too. That's what I was thinking. So, good deal. So, how about geography? Again, we've already done North Carolina a couple times, but
yeah, geography. I would say a 9 for geography. That's what I had North Carolina down as, and I feel like NC State is probably a 9 in the geography. They've got a little bit bigger name town as well compared to like a Durham, North Carolina. So I'm going to keep it at a 9 there for geography.
okay, all right. I mean, they are very close. Actually, all three of those schools are relatively close to each other, but All right, so cultural fit, NC State, and I think this might be where they would kind of argue versus the other two.
Yeah, so cultural fit, I've already said it's going to take a hit because the governor has basically said it's a package deal. If you take North Carolina, you have to take NC State. And I feel like that's kind of a turnoff as far as the SEC goes. It's like, well, I'm not going to be forced to take this school. Um, but I do feel like that they have a decent culture at NC State. Overall, I would say that it's a better culture than Virginia and Duke for sure. Um, I would say that I, I won't say that it necessarily rivals Virginia Tech because I feel like Virginia Tech is a little bit better as far as the cultural fit goes. Um, I'd kind of put it right in the middle overall. I would say probably a 5 for the cultural fit. I might be a little bit generous there, but I think 5, just right in the middle there, is a good spot for them.
Um, Virginia is in kind of a similar situation where the governor and people want the two schools to be linked together if there is a move. But I have to think, like, if UVA and UNC found a home in the Big Ten and Virginia Tech and NC State had invitations in the SEC, I think all of a sudden they'd say, you guys can divide because both you guys are ending up in really primo situations. There's probably not an opportunity where they're going to want to expand and take two schools from North Carolina. So
Right.
I wonder what would happen in a situation like that. But anyway, so how about football competitiveness? You did touch upon this.
Yeah, football competitiveness, it hadn't been there overall. I mean, you've had some decent years at times, but you've had a lot more years where it's been mediocrity or even, less than mediocrity. So I'm gonna put it kind of in that same tier as Virginia and Georgia Tech. Um, I would say they probably are a little bit closer once again to Georgia Tech than they are Virginia. So I'll say a 4 on there. Just not really there overall for me as far as the football competitiveness side goes. Sorry, it's hard for me to say that word for some reason.
Especially the more you say it, it just gets harder and harder. All right, so NC State, not they're definitely kind of above some of these other bottom tier, but not a huge score there. So West Virginia is one. Now I think we've covered most of the schools in the ACC worth discussing. I did realize I left Louisville off here, and I'll probably get some pushback on that from Louisville fans. I do think. I mean, I guess we can just quickly discuss that one, but I think the brand is pretty solid. Football competitiveness, I'd say, not top tier, but again, very solid.
Trending upwards.
Yeah, and they've definitely had times where they've been up and then other times down. But geography, again, I think you've got Kentucky there. Is Louisville enough? I mean, they are there, but they're kind of on the outer edge of that SEC conference. Then cultural fit is probably good. So they're actually probably in line with like a Virginia Tech here, I would guess.
Yeah, I would probably say about the same. I would say Virginia Tech's a slightly better fit overall, but I mean Louisville's got some good metrics overall. I would definitely rival them with Virginia Tech.
All right. So Louisville fans, this wasn't a personal slide; it was oversight on my part. But anyway, I do think they have a strong case. I just don't see the SEC. I think they have so many other options. I don't see it going that way. But all right, so let's look at West Virginia now, because they're one that for a long time tried to get into the SEC. They really thought they had a strong case. They had a fit in a lot of different ways. And that door just never really opened all the way for them. And then they also kind of wanted the ACC. That door also closed on them. So let's talk about West Virginia, because I think they do have some merits. They've got a case to be made. So let's go through and see how they shake out.
So West Virginia, I will say this is one of those that recency bias does hurt them slightly, just because they haven't been one of those top tier brands that they were at one time. But when you hear the name West Virginia, you still think a strong football program overall. So I would say, as far as a brand goes, I would put them kind of on the same type tier as Virginia Tech. Um, I want to put them at an 8 really bad, but I don't know if I can quite put them in an 8. So I'm going to say a 7 for the brand overall. And I like I said, I feel like the recency bias for them kind of brings that down some, because they're not competing for championships year in and year out the way that they were, but they're still a very competitive football team.
Okay, I think that's pretty fair because of that. And then you have geography.
Geography, you're kind of starting to move once again into that Big Ten type area, up closer to the Northeast. You're on that East Coast. You're teetering right there on the edge of the Mason-Dixon line overall. Um,
Well, I think they're north. I mean, they were northern state, although I think Kentucky was too, if I'm not mistaken. So whatever. But yeah, point taken. They are further north for sure.
yeah, so I would say, as far as the geography goes, I'm going to be leaning more towards I would say probably a 5 on that one, because I feel like I feel like the SEC would welcome in West Virginia quicker than they would Notre Dame. So I think, right in the middle. I might even lean a little bit closer to a 4. But I'll say a 5 for the geography.
Wow. Okay. And then cultural fit.
Cultural fit, this is a fan base that loves their team. They're going to support their team no matter what. Um, as far as, are they up to an SEC type environment? Absolutely not. But I do feel like that the love that the fans have for their fan base, for their team overall, I'm going to lean them probably about a 7, similar to I would Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I went to one game there. I was a little disappointed, but it was at a point in the season when they were pretty bad and didn't have as much to get excited about. But they did steamroll my Cougs, so should have been a little more hype. But yeah, their reputation definitely precedes them in terms of the atmosphere that they've got going on there. All right, and then football competitiveness.
So football competitiveness is one of those that I would say is rivaling Virginia Tech once again. Back in the mid 2000s and even the early 2010s, I would say that they were close to competing for championships. I mean, what was it, the '07 year, if I'm not mistaken, when it was West Virginia and somebody that were right there, battling to go to the national title game, or maybe I'm thinking of a little bit earlier, but I do remember a year when West Virginia was battling. They had a chance to go and lost the game to Pitt, that would have ended up putting them into the national title game. So that helps bring it up some. They've been kind of in. They've been a perennial top 25 team most years, or teetering right on the outside of it. So I would say a 7 as far as the competitiveness goes. And recency bias, I would say, might be trending more towards a 6, but I'll still put them at a 7.
All right, okay, I think fair enough. So again, you can kind of see why they've been considered in the past and made a strong case, but didn't quite get there. And actually, some of these other schools, there was a time before Missouri was added that Virginia Tech was in the mix. I think Clemson, Florida. Well, wait, perhaps I'm mixing up there, but Virginia Tech definitely was. Maybe even NC State. So some of these schools were definitely in consideration before, but you can kind of see why perhaps they didn't quite get to that point where it made sense. So Kansas. So people are probably wondering why I have Kansas on here, and really, I think they thought they were a shoo-in for the Big Ten when the Big Ten was expanding again. That invite never came, and the reason why I put them on here, they're a little bit more of a long shot Hail Mary, but I do think they have, and at least because of basketball, when you start talking about that, they have a brand, but also they do border. They have a deep rivalry with Missouri, and that is very competitive. They're still part of that contiguous state. They border the conference, so they'd be able to stay within, kind of meet that criteria. I do think they are a long shot, but I kind of want to cover our bases. Say, okay, what else is out there? Where else could the SEC look if they were to expand? And so, how about you? How would you score Kansas on brand here?
You're 100% right. This is an absolute long shot, and my answers are going to absolutely reflect that. The brand overall, you've got a great basketball brand, but that's about all that you have. Football has trended upward at times, especially over the last couple of years. But overall, most years, Kansas is you see them on the schedule, and that's pretty much an automatic win if you're the opposing team. So the brand overall, I'm going to give them a 3 for the brand. It's not there, and basketball does not help bring it up enough when football weighs so heavily.
Okay. And then geography.
Geography, this is going to be the lowest one on my board so far. I'm going to go with a 2 as far as geography because Kansas, if you're trying to keep this footprint of the southeastern conference or of the southeastern part of the United States, you're really reaching to go out to Kansas. I know that they just got Oklahoma, which is a state um, just below Kansas, but you know you weren't going to get Oklahoma without, or you weren't going to get Texas without Oklahoma if you were adding 2 teams. You weren't going to get Oklahoma without Texas if Oklahoma was a team that you were reaching out for. Kansas, on the other hand, I'm just going to be frank. Nobody wants Kansas. Missouri fans will fight you to the death to keep Kansas out of anything that they're a part of now. The hate is real there. Kansas, to me, just from other fans that I have talked to, like Texas fans, Oklahoma fans, Missouri fans. I'll even throw in Texas A&M and the few Kansas State fans that I've talked to. Obviously, those are big rivals there as well. Nobody likes Kansas. It's just something about their mindset, the way they carry themselves. Nobody likes them. So the geography, as far as you're starting to get out of that geographical footprint there, that's why I have them at a 2. And a cultural fit, I would also go with a 2. The basketball side of things is the only thing that keeps it from being a 1, because their fans in basketball are crazy and they show out every single game for their team, but it's it's not an SEC type environment at all whenever it comes to the football side of things, which is what weighs so heavily overall. There's nothing to me about Kansas that says we're SEC type material. And football competitiveness, I'm going to let recency bias keep it once again from being a 1, as they've been, at least competitive to an extent. But this is a 2 for football competitiveness for Kansas. They're just not a competitive team overall.
Ooh, I think that one's a little harsh based on how we have you. I guess UVA at least made a New Year's 6, but I guess that fair enough. I mean, they have been the butt of college football for a long time. I'd say the last few years they've turned around. Lance Leipold, I think, is a great coach, is doing a lot with that program. And then they did
Yes, I do like Lance Leipold a lot. I don't feel like it would be a good fit overall. But I do like what he's doing with that program. But I also feel like that you get another year or two like you have over the last couple of years where you're competitive, and Lance Leipold is going to move up to a bigger job. And then where's Kansas going to be after that?
Well, yeah, you never want to stake too much into a single coach. It has to be something that you can prove is sustainable, and whether he stays or not, because I don't know if he will, but maybe he does. But the other thing is that they've just opened up a new stadium, and so I think with the way Kansas football is trending, with investment that they're apparently they're seemingly making into the program, that they have an opportunity to really turn things around over the next few years. But they before this next wave of realignment hits, which is a relatively short window, they've got to really start doing things to impress, I think, to get more on that radar. But and yeah, these other schools, they're not all Southeast, but they're at least South in most metrics, or at least in some metrics. Not metrics, but definitions, regions, all kind of they're blurry lines, depends on who you ask, but there's not a single time that I've ever seen Kansas mentioned in the South. In fact, that's what we talk about the border war with Kansas and Missouri about. So very strongly Midwest team there, not a Southeast. But all right. And lastly, I want to put this in there because for the Big Ten, we did kind of like, if they were to breach into the SEC and try to get a school, you might be able to get a Texas A&M, who you mentioned was very unhappy about the addition of Texas. They like being out on their own, doing something different, and kind of fit some of the MO of the Big Ten. That was a Hail Mary. So I wanted to put it out there. What if the SEC did the same thing? You got Nebraska, who's kind of on the fringes there in terms of academics, of qualifying and being in the Big Ten, haven't really been able to, since being removed from Texas, kind of pulled from their roots of recruiting and things, have not been able to sustain success like they had prior to being in the Big Ten, that maybe they would have more success going elsewhere. And if, because of their history, because it is a big brand, if that might be enough to entice the SEC to go after and poach a school from the Big Ten. And granted, while it's not much, they do share a little bit of border with Missouri. So they're still touching, but again, not in the Southeast there. So this one, I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of curious to see if we could see any of that going on the other way around, of the SEC saying, hey, let's turn around and take someone from the Big Ten.
So here's what I will say. I feel like my numbers on some of these metrics here for Nebraska are going to skew what I actually feel about Nebraska possibly being a new member of the SEC, because brand overall, granted, recency bias definitely hurts them because of how bad they have been recently. But the brand for Nebraska is actually still there overall, because when you hear Nebraska, you think that's a dang good football team back in the 90s, and even back in the 80s before then, Nebraska, that was one of the teams to beat year in and year out. And most teams that are like that, you would say, if they're mediocre as they have been, and even sometimes less than mediocre, that brand's going to fall off. And Nebraska's hasn't fell off as much as it probably should have. I would say that even with as bad as they have been at times, they're still up there at like a 7, maybe even an 8 as far as their brand goes.
Yeah, I mean, that they started from a very high high ceiling, right, where they were at. So they had a long way to fall. But man, I wonder how much longer they can kind of be mediocre and maintain that, because the longer you go, people are going to start forgetting, and newer generations aren't going to know anything about that. But yeah, that brand still does have cachet.
Yeah. So as far as geography goes, once again, I'm going to put Nebraska at a 2. The only way to me that I'm putting any of these teams or any team at a 1 is if you're looking at going and adding a Stanford, a Washington State, Oregon State, someone that's on the complete opposite side of the country. At least Nebraska, as you mentioned, kind of barely borders Missouri, but still it's way out of the geographical footprint that I feel like that the SEC is trying to keep. And even if we were talking about media markets, Nebraska's not a huge media market either. So to me, the geography just wouldn't make sense for the SEC overall. Now,
cultural fit.
Say again.
Oh, sorry. No, keep going.
Yeah. So cultural fit. Here's where I'll kind of make fun of my own team, because when you think about Nebraska and you think about Tennessee, I'm going to ask you, So when you think about Nebraska and Tennessee, and you talk about their fans, what's something that comes to mind whenever you think about their fans? I'm just curious what your answer might be on this.
Um, I don't know if I look at their fans in the same light necessarily. I don't know if I have much of an opinion on Nebraska fans. I've heard they're really nice. Tennessee fans, I would say, your quintessential SEC environment and a bit nuts and passionate and maybe a little bit slightly delusional, as most of us sports fans are about their team. I will say though, fans were actually it was not a bad environment to be in. Like, it was rowdy. They were really gave it to us, but on the other hand, people were really nice. I mean, I guess it's easier to be nice when after you've just lost, and so you can't go talking trash. I don't It might have been different had the game gone differently, but so I don't know. I have kind of a skewed view of Tennessee fans after that, because everyone was like really pleasant.
So you kind of hit on what I was getting towards. Tennessee fans and Nebraska fans are very delusional in the fact that every single year the fans say this is our year. And even as bad as Nebraska has been recently, every year, this is the year we're going to pull it out each
Yeah.
and every year. And each and every year, just like with Tennessee, it does not happen. But as far as the cultural fit goes, I feel like that they would fit well in the SEC. I mean, they've got a very big stadium in Nebraska. I believe it's maybe 90,000 people is what it'll hold, or just shy of 90,000, something like that. So it's a big stadium. The fans, they come out and support. Even in their bad years, they come out and they support. So a cultural fit, I'm not going to put it, you know, up there at a 10 by no means, because I do feel like that they're not a SEC type environment, but the way that their fans support their team and they're crazy about their team, that definitely helps. I would say that Nebraska would be an 8 overall for a cultural fit.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Go Nebraska. And then football competitiveness. I think this goes right
So
along with
I've
what you're saying.
so I've got to go with the same metrics that I have used for the entire time and go over the last 20 years, which is what I remember as far as football goes. And Nebraska over those last 20 years, I would say they've been kind of on the same type tier as Virginia. I would say a 3 for football competitiveness.
Oof. Ouch. That how the mighty have fallen. But so for Nebraska, you're saying it's a long shot, but the SEC might be picking up the phone at least. They might as all right, we'll at least hear you out, but probably no.
Yeah, I think that they would hear them out, but I don't see any serious consideration overall for Nebraska. And that's why I said, my numbers are going to be a little bit skewed there, because I do think Nebraska got a good brand. I think that they're a pretty decent cultural fit, but just the geography and the competitiveness there, it really takes it down overall. Which is why I don't think that the SEC would seriously consider Nebraska.
All right, so let's review some of these as we look at everybody's scores. We've had them on the screen, so let's kind of go through. These were all a bit lower. Virginia Tech kind of creeping into this upper echelon, and then we have kind of the big names that we've been hearing about. And Notre Dame, obviously, a lot would have to happen before they were even interested in joining a conference, let alone specifically the SEC. But so looking at these guys, this kind of seems to be the top brands. Does this align with what you think might actually happen, or with what you want to see?
Yeah, so that pretty much aligns with what I would think. I think that even though Florida State has been that team that they've made it known that they want out, they're one in the SEC, one in the Big Ten. Basically, just they want anywhere except the ACC, and that's really, to me, kind of turns me off as far as trying to get Florida State. I do feel like that's one of the teams that they would get. So if we're just going with two teams, I think it's Clemson and I think it's Florida State that they would add to the SEC. But
Okay.
let's say that we're adding 4 teams to get to an even 20. I think that the 4 teams that I've got the highest is the teams that I would pick. It's Florida State, it's Clemson, it's North Carolina, it's Virginia Tech.
Wow. Okay. And Tennessee has a little bit of a rivalry with Tech, right?
Uh, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a rivalry as much as it is, you've got you played the battle at Bristol back in 2016. They're very close to each other as far
Yeah.
as the geography goes. So it does kind of amaze me if they don't play as much as they do. Um, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily a rivalry, but they definitely get competitive whenever you talk about the two teams going up against each other, no matter what sport it is. Um, and I wish I could have gone to that game at Bristol. I would have been a senior in high school whenever they played that year. It was an incredible game to watch for sure. So yeah, I would have loved to have been there. The biggest crowd to ever watch a college football game and a football game in general um, at Bristol Motor Speedway.
Wow. I didn't realize that. I do remember that game though. But okay, so you're saying UNC, FSU, Clemson, and Virginia Tech here. If they were to go to an expanded 20. Now, my question is, do you think UNC would pick SEC over Big Ten?
So UNC UNC would be the one team that I would say probably would pick the Big Ten over the SEC when it comes to the teams that I picked out there. I do feel like overall they might be a slightly better pick than or a slightly better fit for the Big Ten than the SEC. I don't know a whole lot about the AAU side of things. I was very interested listening to you and JR kind of talk about it. I've tried to look into it a little bit, but it's just not something that the SEC really um, they're really known for on
Right.
that side of things. So
I mean, you do
I
have
feel
some
like with
AAU schools in the SEC, but you're saying it's not a priority that they're making for membership or anything.
Yes. So I feel like in that case, North Carolina is slightly a better fit for the Big Ten. And I think that, especially if the money is right, that they would pick the Big Ten over the SEC. Um, but as far as Florida State, Clemson, and Virginia Tech goes, I feel like if the offer comes from the SEC, that's where they're going to go. They're going to go to the SEC over the Big Ten.
Okay, interesting. I vouch for that. I think if Virginia Tech could choose, they've wanted to be in the SEC for a long time. I imagine Florida State and Clemson, because of those natural rivalries, would like that too. Um, I mean,
So
honestly,
I actually before we move on, I have one other team that I think you talked about in the Big Ten one that I'd like to kind
okay,
of discuss a little bit.
sure.
Um, that's Texas Tech. Um,
Oh,
so
sure.
I do feel like overall that if we're talking about Texas Tech, that the Big Ten would probably be the direction that they would go. Um, But I do also want to look at it like this. Texas Tech's brand has definitely jumped with the NIL era coming in because of all the oil donors and stuff that they have. They've got the money that they can compete now. So I feel like their brand has started to jump. Now, overall, when you look at their history of the last 20 years, like I've been talking about, I'm basing it off of, they've been a middle tier type team, maybe trending more towards the higher levels. I would say, a six and a 6 on my level for the brand, but I feel like that could definitely be trending upwards when you consider the the backing that the football program has now, the resources that they are putting into that program. So that's where I have them on the brand is about a 6. Now, geography, here's the thing that's going to bring the geography down for me. It's the fact that I don't think the SEC is going to be looking to take a third school out of the state of Texas. I don't know if they're going to take a third school out of any state, which is why I had Miami a little bit lower, Because I feel like if they take anybody from Florida, it's going to be Florida State, and I don't think they add Florida State and Miami. You've already got Texas A&M and you've got Texas, but let's use the scenario. You mentioned in the Big Ten one that Texas A&M might decide that they want to go to the Big Ten. Big Ten extends the offer and they leave. I think at that point you might be able to bring in Texas Tech, and they'd be right on par with Texas A&M, maybe even a little bit better because of the backing that they have. So geography, as of right now, I'm going to leave right in the middle at a 5. Um, but that could go either direction depending on what Texas A&M would do if they end up moving or staying in the SEC based on conference realignment. Cultural fit, I don't think that they are up to SEC standards as far as the fan base goes, and all that stuff. But as I've already mentioned, they're putting a lot of stock in their football program. They've got the oil vendors. They've got the money. They are making sure that they put all of it into the football program. They want success there. So can that cultural fit end up coming eventually? I would say yes. But as of right now, it's not there. I'm going to actually lean more towards a 4 for the cultural fit as of now. Texas and Texas A&M are definitely a better fit overall. Football competitiveness, I would say probably I'm going to put them right around a West Virginia, Virginia Tech. They're around a 7. They're borderline top 25 every single year. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're lower. But I feel like, especially with, I'm going to keep mentioning it, the resources that they're putting into the football program, that number is going to trend up and up as the years keep going on, especially if they stay in the Big 12. They could be a perennial powerhouse winning the Big 12 or competing for the Big 12 every single year, as they should be.
So for geography, and I'm glad you brought up Texas Tech. We'd kind of exchanged about them. It was oversight on my part, and I guess in my brain, I'm thinking, they're probably set on Texas. They got the two arguably biggest brands, obviously. Obviously, Texas definitively is, and A&M is debatable, but two big brands from the state already. So I kind of assumed they wouldn't go that way. But you're right. You think if A&M, for example, were to leave and go to the Big Ten, if that's even a thing, if that were to happen, you think that geography score would then go up because it would make it more desirable to get a second school in the state of Texas?
I definitely think that it would go up as far as the geography, especially if everything else trends upwards the way that I think that it should with the resources that they're putting into the football program. As I mentioned, they should be competing for Big 12 titles every single year, which means if you're competing for a Big 12 title, you're going to be competing for a spot in the college football playoff every single year. And that's definitely going to make them more appealing. So if the SEC is looking for a team that's going to be a competitor year in and year out in the conference, then yeah, I think that if A&M leaves to go to the Big Ten, that they would strongly consider Texas Tech.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying they've got a few years to kind of audition and bring the score up a little bit, and then they could be a very enticing option.
Yeah, and I don't think that's just for the SEC. I think that's for the Big Ten as well. Now, I don't know, is Texas Tech an AAU program?
I don't believe so, but
okay. But even if they're not, I feel like that these next few years are going to pay dividends as far as if they do want to leave the Big 12. And who's to say Texas Tech wants to leave the Big 12? They might be content being that premier Big 12 school that's winning the conference or competing for the conference every single year. They might be satisfied there, but I feel like if they want to move to a different conference, these next couple of years are going to pay dividends as far as you kind of said the words, an audition type thing.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting take. So, all right, well, excellent. Very interesting to get your perspective on this, and it is interesting to see how a lot of the same players, obviously, as that would be available for the Big Ten, and how that scoring differs from that different perspective of what the SEC is looking for versus the Big Ten. So very interesting to see, obviously, how all this plays out. Now, I personally I'm well on record that I don't love the way realignment continues to go and just how big the conferences are getting, I liked them much better. You know, how it used to be much more regional. And that is one thing that the SEC at least has done, is kept it relatively regional. And so I got to at least give them credit for that. But, you know, it is happening. And so it is always interesting to look at how it's happening and get the different perspectives, because everybody's got just a slightly different view on how this is going to shake out. And so it's fun getting that kind of from the inside, from the SEC, because for a lot of us from the outside think we know what the SEC wants, but it's kind of interesting to get your take. So I really appreciate it. And you, again, joining me after work. I know you're really busy and got to be tired. So I appreciate it. And as always, you're always welcome on the show, but seriously, go check out the Vol Fanatics Show and all of our College Huddle cohorts. We've got, I wouldn't say all schools, but we're getting there. We've got most schools covered with a show, College Huddle. So
yeah, we got over 80 schools that are represented. So over 80 of the, I think it's 136 FBS programs now. So we're over 50%.
Yeah, and it's just growing all the time. We're getting new shows and new members. So go check out all of our other College Huddle programs, and links to that in the show notes below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and go Cougs.